Hello there. My name's Lewis. Welcome to another episode of Lewis Too Much Analyzes Comics. In this episode, I will not be analyzing a comic. Instead, I will be analyzing the personality type of Tim Drake, otherwise known as Red Robin. Now, if you've watched my Batman personality video, where I type him as an INTJ, I said in that video that Batman is my favorite superhero. And technically that is true. Over the last 50 years, pretty much ever since Denny O'Neil took over writing for Batman, Batman has been written consistently well, outside of like a few short stints where I feel like he's kind of like fallen off the rails. But for the most part, Batman has been written consistently well. And as a result, a lot of the stories that have been written about Batman have been amazing. And some of my favorite comic book stories of all time have involved Batman as the main character. And so because of that, I say that Batman is my favorite superhero, again, because of that consistency and longevity, right? Now, that being said, in terms of the superhero that I have the most affection for and that I connect with the most and that ultimately got me into comics, it is this gentleman right here, Tim Drake, Red Robin. I love this character so much. Again, my affection for him honestly is more so even than the affection that I have towards Batman. I love Tim Drake, and so for that reason, it's been very kind of like sad for me that I feel like ever since the New 52, outside of some of James Tynion's stories, ever since the New 52, I feel like Tim Drake has been directionless, purposeless. His personality has at times been kind of like all over the place, and it makes me very sad. And in addition to that, he has this terrible name, Red Robin. It's his name sucks, and partially because of the franchise, the restaurant franchise Red Robin. So it sucks on that front, and then it also sucks on the front that I feel like it kind of conveys that the character hasn't moved past being Robin, even though there's a new Robin. And the thing is, again, Tim Drake is my favorite Robin. I think that he's the perfect Robin to Bruce Wayne's Batman. I'm going to talk about that as I go through his personality function stack. But I have no problem with Tim Drake moving past being Robin and entering into a new identity. The problem is that, again, see, the name kind of conveys that he hasn't moved past that identity. Now, I'm actually going to kind of like work that into the personality type because I actually think that it does fit the personality type. However, in terms of marketing and commercialization of the character, it stinks. Like Dick Grayson has this super cool name, Nightwing, and then Tim Drake, he's still stuck on being Robin. He just added the word red in front of the name. So I hate that name. I actually think that if he named himself after the car that he drives around in Chuck Dixon's Run on Robin, the Red Bird, that would actually be a better name than Red Robin. I'm not saying it's an amazing name or anything like that, but I think it's a better name than Red Robin. So if like he had become Red Bird after he stopped being Robin, I probably would have been way more okay with that than him being Red Robin. But anyways, I digress, all right? So now that I've professed my love of Tim Drake and vented about some of my frustrations regarding the character ever since he stopped being Robin, let's get into his personality type, all right? So I have typed Red Robin or Tim Drake as an INTP, which means that he leads with introverted thinking. His parent function is extroverted intuition, his child function is introverted sensing, and his inferior function is extroverted feeling. So just a really quick overview of what that looks like. So INTPs, they're very analytical, they're very logical because their primary function is a logic function. Their extroverted intuition, number one, makes them intuitives, which puts them kind of like in their heads a lot more than they are in reality. So they're going to prefer doing intellectual activities in their heads versus engaging with the external world. And he's also introverted, and so that's going to kind of compound that. And his introverted sensing child is going to make him sometimes a little, it's going to make it so that he sometimes will have a hard time letting go of certain things, of wanting to move past certain things. And so we can see that actually in the name, that he doesn't want to move past the idea of being Red Robin. And then they have extroverted feeling inferior, which, because they're so analytical up here, they can a lot of times be disconnected from their emotions, which we'll kind of talk about that in terms of Tim Drake. But yeah, that's kind of the overview of the INTP. Hyper intelligent, great at being detectives, great at manipulating, like, you know, the cyber environment, things like coding and all that kind of stuff. INTPs are great at that, which is something that Tim Drake has been consistently written to do well. And then again, they can have a little bit of a tough time engaging with their feelings, and can sometimes not understand why certain things are wrong or right, because of the fact that they have a little bit of a disconnect from their feelings. So for them, what's right is whatever is logical, versus sometimes, you know, what's moral. And so we'll get to that in a second. All right. So here we go. So Tim Drake, he leads with introverted thinking, which again is a logic. It's the logic function. It's our mind's attachment to the logic centers of our brain. Because he leads with introverted thinking, it makes him hyper intelligent. It makes him able to deduce things, which is evident right from his introduction. So for those who've never read the story of Tim Drake, the way that he becomes Robin is that after Jason Todd, who I did a video on, and I recommend that you watch that video as well. He's currently known as the Red Hood. So if you want to search for that video, that's what that's the name that it's under. So after Jason Todd is killed by the Joker, Batman spends, I think it's like 6 months or a year or something like that, without a Robin. And during that time, he kind of like loses his way to a degree, partially because he's mourning Jason. And so he's just like kind of, you know, not in the right place mentally. But also, and this is something that Tim Drake points out to him, it's because he doesn't have a Robin anchoring him to humanity. So he's like kind of disconnected himself from humanity. And so he needs, you know, a young sidekick to center him and keep him attached and remind him of why it is that he does what he does, right? And so what happens is Tim Drake, when he's younger, so he's maybe like 6 or something like that, he was taken to the circus on the day that Dick Grayson's parents are killed. And so during the performance, he ends up seeing Dick Grayson perform this move. I think it's like a quadruple flip. And using his introverted sensing child. So introverted sensing, for those who haven't watched my Personality Types 101 video, which I also recommend that you watch, I especially actually recommend that you watch that video, because it's going to be very helpful in terms of when I talk about each of these functions and how they work. If you watch that video, it's going to go a long way to helping you understand how I talk about them. All right, so the introverted sensing function, essentially what it does is it maps sensory experiences, and helps you to remember that. And so so basically it's our mind's connection to our long-term memory. And so higher introverted sensors are really good actually about mapping things, about like mapping physical sensations and then remembering them. And so utilizing his introverted sensing child, Tim Drake maps this quadruple flip, because it's like something that he's kind of like, that, you know, that's so startling to him. He's never seen it before. And then he's very impressed by this flip. You know, again, he maps it, and then Dick Grayson's parents die because of the circus accident. He goes home that day, and as he grows older, he ends up becoming obsessed with Batman, and more specifically with Robin. He thinks that Robin is super cool, right? And so he's like getting like press clippings and like watching anytime that the news has anything about Batman and Robin on it. He's like, "Oh, Dad, let me watch the news with you." And so on one occasion, he's watching the news and he sees, they capture Robin for like a brief second, attacking one of the villains, and Robin ends up performing that quadruple flip that Dick Grayson had performed. And so Tim He remembers that quadruple flip. He knows there's no way that anybody else, especially somebody of that same age, can do that flip, right? And so he starts investigating what happened to Dick Grayson after Dick Grayson was, after the whole incident at the circus, and he finds out that Dick Grayson was adopted by Bruce Wayne. And then he realizes that about 6 months after Dick Grayson is adopted by Bruce Wayne, Robin appears on the scene with Batman. And so he deduces, using his TI in introverted thinking hero, he logically deduces that Dick Grayson is Robin, Bruce Wayne is Batman. Now he's also realizing in real time that Batman has lost his way and that he's like pummeling criminals and he's brutalizing them in a way that he never has before. And so he realizes, again, utilizing his TI, but also utilizing his extroverted intuition. So he kind of detects this pattern, right, that Batman has lost his way because he's brutalizing criminals. He also realizes, of course, that Jason Todd was killed because in real life, Bruce has kind of confirmed the idea that Jason Todd has died. Batman hasn't acknowledged the idea that Robin is dead. But he recognizes, okay, if Jason Todd is dead, then that means that Robin is dead. And so utilizing his extroverted intuition, which is kind of picking up on this pattern that whenever Batman has a Robin, he's much more stable. He deduces, again using his TI, that Batman needs a Robin. Now his first conclusion is to actually go to Dick Grayson and tell Dick Grayson that he needs to go back to being Robin. But at this point, Dick Grayson is an adult and he doesn't think that it's the right move for him to go back to being Robin. And, over the course of some events where Two-Face ends up like capturing both Batman and Nightwing, Tim Drake ends up taking on the mantle of Robin. Initially, temporarily, he's not intending to be Robin, but he puts on the Robin costume to kind of like throw off Two-Face and save Bruce and Dick from the trap that Two-Face has put them in. And so, anyways, he ends up convincing Bruce that Bruce needs a Robin because, again, it's that tether to humanity, and Bruce ends up allowing Tim Drake to become Robin. Now, I said at the beginning of the video that Tim Drake is pretty much the perfect Robin to Bruce's Batman. Why is that? All right. So if you notice a comparison to Jason Todd, right? So Jason Todd, again, you should watch that video because then you'll understand what I'm talking about. But in the Jason Todd video, I talked about how Jason Todd actually has the opposite function stack as Bruce. So he has NETI, FESI, which Bruce has NITE, FISE as his function stack. And so because of that, that generates a lot of conflict. Now, one quick thing that I didn't say in that video in terms of personality types just in general is that a lot of times opposite personality types can be sources of growth in people, because essentially what will happen is somebody with an opposite personality is basically approaching the world through a completely opposite lens as you. And so by bouncing ideas off of each other, you can actually find areas in yourself that are not fully developed or fully thought through, or that you're just kind of operating off of instinct in a sense. And so that person kind of like almost is like a negative mirror to you, right? And so it can allow you to grow. And so in a sense, like Bruce and Jason kind of could do that with each other, but ultimately because of the fact that Bruce is in a mentor role and Jason is in a more subservient or mentee role, it's a little bit more difficult for Bruce especially to like grow based on Jason's personality. And Jason, because of the fact that he's so argumentative, he never fully gets to the chance to grow based on Bruce's personality. Instead, what happens is they're constantly in conflict with each other, right? Now, this is in opposition to Tim Drake. If you notice, though, Tim Drake shares all of the same functions as Jason Todd. The only thing is that they fall in a different sequence. And in fact, it's a very similar sequence. That's why Jason Jason is an ENTP, which means that he's the extroverted version of Tim Drake. Tim Drake is the introverted version of Jason Todd. Because of the fact that Tim Drake is introverted, in the same way that Batman is introverted, it's a lot easier actually for them to kind of interact with each other. ENTPs, because of the fact that they're extroverted, they kind of want to share their ideas externally via their NE hero. And so a lot of the times that's why they can come off a lot more argumentative. INTPs can also be argumentative, but the thing is that INTPs typically are not really going to want to argue with people unless they have an established relationship with them, and they're going to have kind of a more take a step back approach a lot of times because they're leading with their TI hero, and so their first function is an introverted function, and so they're going to want to process everything internally before they allow themselves to externally argue, versus ENTPs that kind of do that in reverse. It's like they want to engage in the argument so that way their TI parent can essentially arrive at the truth. And so this ends up complementing Bruce a lot better than Jason does, because again, both of them are introverted, and then again, they do have opposite functions, but instead of it being a source of conflict between them, sometimes it does become a source of conflict between them. But for the most part, it's actually a very complementary relationship where Bruce allows Tim to essentially like kind of fill in the gaps. And because of the fact that Bruce is so intelligent, that's actually going to address Tim Drake's TE villain, which worries about the fact that other people are not as intelligent as he is. A lot of times INTPs, that's one of their sources of concern because they're so intelligent utilizing their TI hero. Their TE villain worries, well, I'm super intelligent, I know all of these things. Is the world around me not that intelligent? And so when they're in the presence of somebody that is highly intelligent, like Batman is, they will oftentimes take kind of like I don't want to say a subservient role, but in Tim Drake's case, that is essentially what he does, right? Like he takes a subservient role to Batman and essentially allows Batman to be the leader. Now, INTPs in general do kind of have like an almost disconnected relationship with the world because of the fact that they're so analytical and they're very open-minded because of their extroverted intuition, and so they're constantly like considering all of these different possibilities, which actually ties into to Tim Drake in a couple of different stories. So most recently in James Tynion's run on Detective Comics from a couple years ago, where Tim Drake is constantly wondering, like, you know, what am I gonna be Red Robin forever, or am I gonna be Batman's sidekick forever? Am I gonna be working for Batman forever, or do I need to be worried about like getting a college degree and all that kind of stuff and disconnecting from this life eventually? So he's kind of projecting outward into like all these potential futures. The same thing happens in Geoff Johns' Teen Titans run, which I love. In Geoff Johns' Teen Titans run, Tim Drake a lot of the times is insisting like, look, my path is not going to be Batman's path. My path is not going to be Batman's path. But for those who've read the story, you know that what happens is the Teen Titans eventually go into this like future dystopian world where they encounter dystopian versions of themselves, and in that story Tim Drake actually does become Batman. And so one of the features kind of extroverted intuition is that it can predict all of these different potential realities and then sometimes make the INTP unsure of which of those potential realities to ultimately pursue. And so that kind of happens to Tim Drake. Now, ultimately, again, that kind of lets him and Batman interact in a way that is complementary to each other, because Batman, with his NI hero and introverted intuition hero, that introverted intuition hero maps out the one way of doing things and will pursue it all the way to the end. And so an INTP can kind of like attach themselves to an INTJ and kind of like follow the INTJ down their pathway, since, you know, they have all these different pathways that they kind of are not sure which one to pursue a lot of the times, right? All right. So that's going to be why Tim and Bruce are very complementary characters to one another. And again, their introverted nature, the fact that both of them are going to have kind of like a more reserved nature, that is going to be a source of both of them being able to connect. Alfred also is an introvert, and so between the three of them, they're all kind of like three happy introverts. Nobody's like needing to engage with the external world in a like a very energetic way, which is what Jason would have been doing, and so it would. Now, I don't want to. I don't want to rag on extroverts, and in fact, ultimately, Dick Grayson is also an extrovert, and so he would bring a lot of life to Wayne Manor and to the relationship between Bruce and Dick, whereas Jason kind of brought a lot of conflict to the relationship, in the household, and so Tim, because he has that more reserved nature, number one, that's partially why I connect with him so much, because I have a more reserved nature, even though I am not an INTP, but I do have more of that reserved nature, and so I connect with Tim on that, and so does Bruce. And again, Tim lets Bruce lead a lot of the times, whereas even Dick Grayson, who was a great Robin, doesn't always let Bruce lead, right? Because ENFJs have their own introverted intuition towards the top that's going to, generate their pathway. And so that's, again, going to be a source of conflict. Again, Dick and Bruce get along, some of the times. Versus Tim, that he almost always really gets along with Bruce, except for like on certain smaller occasions, right? And actually, one of those smaller occasions is an example of the INTP's sometimes argumentative nature in the right circumstances. So there's a time period in the G.F. Johns' Teen Titans run where, and this is also happening concurrently in the Robin series, that Robin starts feeling guilty about the fact that he's having to lie to his father all the time about what he's doing, about his life as Robin, and he starts engaging with Bruce in the Batwing on their way to Titan's Tower about this, and Bruce is kind of telling him like, look, this is my mission, this is what I do, this is my one way, right? It's that introverted intuition, and Tim Drake is kind of like, starts actually arguing with him that it's like, look, you never had to lie to your parents about this, and in a sense he doesn't care about the fact, because of his extroverted feeling inferior, that he actually kind of like hurts Batman's feelings. There's another example actually of Tim Drake's extroverted feeling inferior, which is there's this story that I only recently read, and it's pretty good. It's called Dark. Oh man, now I'm forgetting what it is, but it's this 12-issue run. I think it's on Detective Comics by David Lapham. I feel like it's like Dark City or something like that, or yeah, like Dark Knight, Dark City. I don't remember, and so forgive me for that. But in that series, Robin, actually, there are certain moments where like Robin is kind of like showing off how smart he is, and he's kind of like and he's also like balancing on this thing, and and kind of like just bragging to Bruce about the fact that he had just like rescued some people out of a burning building, and Bruce actually has to remind him like, hey Tim, there were people in there that died, like stop bragging about the fact that you did all of these things. And so that's actually an example of the INTP extroverted feeling inferior, where they can sometimes get so caught up here in like logic land that they forget about the fact that they're that their actions affect other people's emotions, and even that they'll sometimes kind of disconnect from in a sense what, I don't want to say what's right, but what's they can kind of disconnect from humanity in a sense a little bit because of their extroverted feeling inferior. There's another actually instance of him disconnecting from his extroverted feeling inferior in that G.F. Johns Teen Titans run, where Connor Kent, his best friend, who is Superboy, ends up finding out that he's a genetic clone where 50% of his DNA is of Superman, but he has another 50% DNA, and it's revealed that it's from Lex Luthor. And so Connor doesn't believe this, and he pretty much just wants to ignore it. Where Tim, he is so hyper obsessed with the truth that he ends up stealing one of Connor's hairs off of a towel that Connor dries his hair with, and utilizes it to do a DNA test and then ultimately confirm that Lex Luthor is his father. Or is his, his technically his father, his clone father. And so INTPs can kind of fall into that sometimes, where they're so focused on pursuing the truth that, again, they disconnect from their extroverted feeling inferior. And so they're constantly needing to be reminded by people with higher extroverted feeling, like Alfred is a perfect example of that it is important to care about other people's feelings, because the truth matters, but sometimes you have to prioritize what is right over what is. Let me not say that you should do that, but let's say that there are occasions where it is important to prioritize what is right over necessarily pursuing what is true. All right, or at the very least, it's wise to pursue what is right over what is true. All right. Now, I went ahead and I skipped over the introverted sensing child, so let me get back to that. So, introverted sensing child. So this is going to be, number one, the way that Tim Drake interacts physically with the world. And so introverted sensors, the way that they work is introverted. Let me actually compare it to extroverted sensing really quick. So extroverted sensors have a very good connection with their 5 physical senses and with the external world. And so Dick Grayson is a perfect example of somebody who has extroverted sensing child. And so because of that, he finds it very pleasurable to interact with the external world, and it helps him to be very coordinated, and ultimately that's why he's such a good gymnast. ENFJs can make very good gymnasts and all of that kind of stuff, versus INTPs and Tim Drake in specific, that essentially what they need to do when they're going to train their body, so everybody obviously is capable of training their body, but what introverted sensors need to do ultimately is practice a lot, the same kind of motions over and over and over. And higher introverted sensors are going to be a little bit more adept at that, in the same way that high extroverted sensors are going to be more adept at that. But although higher introverted sensors are a lot of times going to fall into like a comfort rut, and so that can be a problem for them, versus higher intuitives that, because of the fact that they live in their head, a lot of the times they can actually kind of disconnect from pain in their body, which all of the characters that we've talked about so far have been intuitives. If you notice, high intuitives. And so, they can a lot of times disconnect from pain in their body, and so they'll kind of push their body past physical limits because they're not as connected with their physical sensations as a higher sensor would be. But anyways, so what Tim Drake has to do is practice a lot. And this is actually brought up in Nightwing 25, the fact that Nightwing, it's this story, for those who haven't read it, in Nightwing 25, where Nightwing takes Tim Drake out for like a night on the town. And really what they do is they end up riding on top of this train, blindfolded, and the game is to essentially stay on the train as it travels through all of Bloodhaven, which is the city that Nightwing is taking care of during that time. And so really the issue ends up utilizing that plot as an excuse for Nightwing and Tim Drake to kind of discuss their lives with each other and discuss some of the differences between the 3 Robins, which I love that issue, by the way. Recommend it if you can get it. So Nightwing number 25. And so during their train ride, one of the things that is talked about is the fact that Tim Drake is a much better detective because of his TI hero than Dick Grayson, who has TI inferior, but that Dick Grayson is much more acrobatic and picks up on things a lot quicker. Like on physical things a lot quicker. It's basically second nature for him to manipulate his body and all that kind of stuff, right? Versus Tim Drake, that he actually has to practice at it, and it doesn't really come very naturally to him. That's going to be because of his introverted sensing child. Now, introverted sensing child also a lot of times is going to want to stay in kind of like a comfort zone, and so you can actually see that in the relationship that Tim has with his father up until his father is killed. So a lot of times what will happen with introverted sensing child is they'll become hyper loyal. And actually you can see this with Tim Drake with everybody. He's hyper loyal to Bruce, he's hyper loyal to his father, he's hyper loyal to Nightwing. In fact, when Batman is killed in Batman RIP, I guess technically killed because he doesn't really die, but in Batman RIP, the only person that stays loyal to Bruce through that situation is Tim Drake, and that's going to be because of introverted sensing child. So introverted sensing child approaches loyalty almost through this like naive lens, that it's like they're naively loyal to things. And a lot of times that for INTPs in general, that can sometimes be bad because they can get caught up in like an abusive relationship, and then they'll stay loyal because of that introverted sensing child. But in the case of Tim, I mean, I don't know if you want to argue that that what Bruce does to the Robins is bad. I wouldn't argue that because I think ultimately it's like a mentor relationship, and it makes them into fully formed adults. And so personally, I absolve Bruce of of any wrongdoing in that situation. So especially because I love the Robins. But so because of his introverted sensing child, he's gonna have an almost like naive approach to loyalty, and he's also going to have a kind of an enjoyment of practice and like practicing physical things. So he's going to enjoy like the martial arts practice, and then he's going to utilize that enjoyment of his martial arts practice to then try and outsmart his opponents with his TI hero, which is something that he does very early on in one of the first stories that Chuck Dixon writes about him. This series called Robin, but it's a mini series. I think it's like 6 issues, and it takes place before Chuck Dixon's 100 issue Robin run, where he really like defines Tim. But anyways, in that Robin series, it's all about Tim. He goes to Paris to try and find some additional training because Bruce is not able to train him. I'm forgetting why at the right now, but Bruce isn't able to train him, and so Robin goes to Paris to find like a sensei there, and so he does find a sensei there, and he starts training under him for a little while. But eventually what happens is there's a whole like it's a comic book, so there's a whole like action kind of plot where Robin gets dragged into this like kind of international espionage sort of thing, and he ends up fighting this bad guy called the King Snake. And so the King Snake has this other enemy whose name is Lady Shiva. And for those who don't know who Lady Shiva is kind of considered like the master assassin of the DC universe. She's like the most dangerous woman on the planet. She's like a perfect martial artist. She has no qualms whatsoever about killing people. In fact, one of her like main sources of joy is trying to get Batman and the Bat family to kill people and like break that one rule that Batman has about killing people. So she finds enjoyment in that, and she's kind of painted typically as like a lone wolf. Obviously she's an assassin, so she can be hired, but really she won't actually do her job if she doesn't actually find it fun. So she's just like this adventurous character. And so anyway, she has some kind of, I'm not remembering exactly why, but she has something against King Snake. And so because Robin is pursuing King Snake, she ends up teaming up with him. And as part of their team up, she ends up training Tim Drake during some of that time. And she's always like beating him up because she's way better, right, than he is. And so what ends up happening is, there comes a moment where Tim Drake, he recognizes using his intelligence and his pattern detection, extroverted intuition, that she does like certain maneuvers. And so he recognizes, okay, if I can throw her off for just one split second, I can actually catch her as she does this one maneuver, right? And so what he does is his weapon of choice is a bow staff. And so he takes his bow staff and he slices a little hole into the top of the bow staff so that when he twirls the bow staff, it makes this whistling sound. And so as they're fighting, all of a sudden he like kind of twirls the bow staff so it makes this whistling sound. It throws off her senses for just a second, and as she does, he like sweeps her legs out from under her and finally catches her, and he kind of like glories for a moment in the fact that he's finally caught her because of his TI hero that, wants to be recognized for being so smart. But then immediately the TI hero also kicks in and tells him, hey buddy, when when it's time to have a rematch, she's gonna beat you up. She's gonna beat the heck out of you. And so anyway, so the repeated practice that he goes through over and over and over again, it builds him into a warrior, right? And ultimately, that's what introverted sensing child needs to do. Now, like I said before, I can kind of tie in that Red Robin name to his introverted sensing child, because introverted sensing child a lot of times doesn't want to move on. It wants to stay loyal to this like comfort zone. And so you can kind of actually see that in the fact that he doesn't want to move on from the Robin name. He wants to stay Robin even though there's a new Robin, which I'm going to talk about in the next video. So those are kind of the features of his ego functions or his conscious functions. All right. Now, how does his unconscious work? If you haven't, I don't know if I already recommended this video, the Personality Types 101 video. If you haven't seen that video, please watch that before you watch any of these videos, because ultimately it's going to be way more informative, or this is going to make a lot more sense to you if you've watched that video. All right? Anyways, moving on. So, his villain function. So, how does the villain work? So, the villain works as an antagonist to the hero function. So, the hero function seeks glory and attention, and is basically like the primary function through which we experience the world, or through which we engage with the world. And so, because he has introverted thinking as his hero, his villain function is extroverted thinking. Now, what does extroverted thinking do? Extroverted thinking is all about imposing systems of order. It's concerned with status, external status. It's basically concerned with the thinking of others, with the collective, the thinking of the collective. And so a lot of times, so what the villain does is it has this antagonistic relationship with the hero. And so what will happen to INTPs and to Tim Drake is that a lot of times he will worry that the people that are around him are not as intelligent as him, and he will not have as much respect a lot of times for people that are not quite as intelligent as him. Now, this is the thing with INTPs, is that when they do find somebody that is hyper intelligent, so somebody that has T thinking like high up, and this is going to be the case with Bruce, right? Because Bruce actually has TE as his parent function. INTPs are really going to respect people like that, because because their villain is satisfied in that situation. Hey, that person is really smart. So it kind of disproves the voice of the villain telling them that everybody around them isn't as smart as they are. And so so they'll kind of like latch on to people like that, people that are hyper intelligent, and through their SI child are going to become very loyal to those people. And, that can be both good and bad. If it's a good INTJ, in the case of Batman, who I think is a good INTJ, it's perfectly acceptable for the INTP to do that. If the INTJ is a bad guy, sometimes they can be misled because of their loyalty, right? All right. And so extroverted thinking villain, that's kind of how it's going to work. It's going to make Tim Drake worry about, again, the fact that the people around him are not as intelligent. And then he's going to have NI critic. All right. Now, NI critic, I think that I talked about this already, but NI critic is going to make INTPs unsure of their own personal desires, of their own personal will, of the things that they want to pursue. And so you can actually see that in Tim Drake's iterations, right? That he doesn't know, does he want to become Batman? Does he not want to become Batman? Does he want to continue being Robin? Does he not want to continue being Robin? Does he want to leave the Bat family eventually? If he does, why doesn't he ever do that? I'm going to tell you why. It's because of his NI critic. Because his NI critic is constantly criticizing the things, his singular pathway, the pathway to move forward. And it's going to be telling him like, hey, your pathway to move forward isn't the right pathway to move forward. And so that's kind of how the critic function works, is it criticizes via that function. And so it's going to make INTPs and Tim Drake very unsure of the desires that they have, of the will, like of the path forward that they have projected for themselves, or at least tried to project for themselves. And by the way, just an FYI for INTPs, that is something that they have to look out for, because a lot of times they can get caught up here in projecting all these possible futures that then they never pursue the actual future that they should pursue, and then they can get stuck, living in their mom's basement forever, and that's not good. But for Tim, obviously, like, at the very least, he's not in his mom's basement, right? He's been called to adventure. If everybody is familiar with that hero's journey term, he's been called to adventure by Bruce early on, and so he at least has a pathway. It's just that he's always questioning that pathway, whether or not it's the right pathway to continue to be on. All right. Now he has extroverted sensing trickster. So this is a feature of INTPs that a lot of the times they're not going to be super concerned with their external appearance, with the external sensations that they're giving off to others, and you can actually see this happen to Tim sometimes. So in the Robin series that Chuck Dixon writes, I actually have this image embedded in my head, and I feel like it's probably because it's one of those issues that I read like 100 million times when I was a kid. But it's of Tim Drake. He goes out all night as Robin, and then he gets home and he falls into his bed and he passes out, and he passes out in his Robin costume without any consideration for the fact that his dad and the dad also has like a live-in servant or a maid or something, whatever she's called. And she's gonna come and wake him up in the morning, and so it's like he has like no consideration for the fact that he's in this state. Also, he'll get like black eyes and not do anything to hide the black eyes. He needs basically like Alfred, or really it's Alfred, to like point out like, hey, like there's this going on. So he can kind of like get lost in himself. It's very similar to what INTJs will do, where they'll get lost in themselves and then not pay attention to the external environment, because INTJs have extroverted sensing inferior. Now, extroverted sensing inferior, at the very least, will sometimes kick in and like recognize that they're giving off some kind of like negative sensations. Extroverted sensing trickster is good luck with that. INTPs, a lot of times, they will not recognize the fact that they're giving off bad sensory experiences, so they may not take showers, things like that. They'll get so consumed in what they're doing that they'll kind of like forget to give off like good sensations. All right, and then that's going to bring us to introverted feeling demon. So introverted feeling demon, it's kind of interrelated with the extroverted feeling inferior. So the introverted feeling demon is going to make INTPs very unaware of how they feel. And a lot of the times it's going to disconnect them from a sense of personal morality. And so essentially what they're going to do is, again, they're going to be pursuing the truth at all times, even at the expense sometimes of other people's feelings, and even of and really they're going to be unaware of their own feelings. So they're going to pursue things almost kind of like mechanically, right? Again, not mechanically, it's more like logically. Like they're going to prioritize logic over emotions, and they're going to hit you with logic over emotions. And so again, you can see that in some of the examples I already utilized for the extroverted feeling inferior. Now, what will happen to INTPs is if they ignore their feelings for too long, is introverted feeling demon is going to come out kind of like in a rage mode, or like in a very unhealthy mode. And so that happens to Tim actually in the story where, so as Tim is becoming Robin, there's the story where his parents are traveling to this little island, and what happens in the island is his mom ends up getting killed by this, if I'm remembering right, it's like a voodoo priest or something. I might be wrong on that, but it's something like that. His mom ends up getting killed by this voodoo priest, and during that same encounter, his dad actually gets paralyzed for a time. And so his mom has died, and his dad is laid up in the hospital. And throughout all of that scenario, you can see Tim, like, it moves him, like he's affected by it, but at the same time he has like a very dispassionate approach to the whole situation, where he even tells Alfred, maybe this is a necessary step in order for me to become Robin. And so he's like looking at this like through a very analytical lens, right? It's like and Alfred almost gets a little bit scared that it's like, Tim, like, don't say such a thing, like that's terrible, like we don't want your father to pass away, and like you need to mourn your mother. And so like he ends up, like his mother passes away, and he like does kind of mourn her a little bit, but ultimately like he really like moves right into being Robin and like pursuing that that mission, because ultimately INTPs can do that because of the fact that they're a little bit disconnected from their emotions. But if you get them into like the right state, and so actually I remember a time that does happen, which is in Grant Morrison's run when he brings when Batman brings Damian Wayne home for the first time. Initially, Tim Drake tries to make friends with him and like interact with him, but what happens is Damian escapes in the middle of the night. He ends up killing a supervillain, coming back to the cave with the guy's head, and Tim Drake goes into rage mode. And what will happen to INTPs in rage mode is they will sometimes lose themselves in their feelings, and that's what happens to Tim in that moment where he starts fighting with Damian all in a rage, and Damian ends up besting him pretty quickly. I'm not remembering off the top of my head too many instances where Tim goes into rage mode, but he can sometimes go into nihilism mode because of the fact that INTPs have introverted feeling demon. Like this one issue in Chuck Dixon's Robin run where there's this like bully in the school, and then that Tim Drake goes to, and then that bully is like also participating in some kind of like crime, if I'm remembering right, and Robin starts pursuing him, and ultimately what happens is they get cornered in this place that, if I'm remembering right, I feel like it's like filling up with water, like it's like a place that's like heading underwater, and the bully, like Robin and the bully, try and like lift up this this thing that is on top of the bully, and Robin is not able to, and ultimately the bully ends up dying, and Robin leaves, and he has kind of like a nihilistic sort of sequence of issues that follow after that, where he's just kind of like questioning whether or not things matter and all that kind of stuff. And so that can be something too that INTPs fall into, is that like nihilistic connection with their own feelings, because their feelings tend to manifest in like a somewhat negative way because of the fact that it interacts with them via their demon function. So yeah, and so ultimately what they need to do in that situation is what Robin does, which is number one, focus on the mission. You know, don't listen, well, in a sense, listen to the critic by allowing themselves to actually pursue a goal, and then pursue that goal. Make sure that the goal is an ethical goal, a goal that serves everybody in the community, right, and benefits everybody in the community, and do that using their TI hero, which is their, you know, their most potent function and their biggest contribution to humanity. And so that is Tim Drake, Red Robin. I hope everybody enjoyed that video. Anybody that stuck around this long, I love you very much from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate you, and I hope that you keep watching my videos. Like the video if you did, and subscribe to my channel if you like these videos. All right, bye-bye.